The paper plate landed in front of me with a dull thud. Cold mashed potatoes, congealed gravy, and 3 wilted green beans. Leftovers from the buffet line that had closed an hour ago. I stared at the scraps while laughter and champagne toasts echoed around the grand ballroom. My sister's wedding reception was in full swing, and I'd just been served garbage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Natalie Hartwell, and for the past 15 years, I've been the family disappointment. The one who left Riverside Heights at 18 with nothing but a backpack and a burning need to prove I was worth more than my family believed. Now, at 33, I sat in the back corner of the Grandview Hotel ballroom, watching my younger sister Penelope bask in the spotlight of her dream wedding while I picked at leftovers like an afterthought. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I have something extra special lined up for you. The journey back to Riverside Heights had taken every ounce of courage I possessed. 3 days ago, I'd received the wedding invitation, forwarded to my office address by someone who tracked me down through LinkedIn. The envelope had been addressed incorrectly, my last name misspelled, the invitation itself a standard print rather than the custom calligraphy everyone else received. Even in her invitation, Penelope had made it clear where I ranked. I almost didn't come. My assistant, Diane, had advised against it. You don't owe them anything, she'd said, reviewing my schedule on the screen in my corner office at Hartwell Innovations. Especially not after they cut you off 15 years ago. But something pulled me back. Maybe it was the naive hope that time had softened my mother's resentment. Maybe it was curiosity about whether my father would even acknowledge my existence. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to see if Penelope had changed from the spoiled golden child who'd always gotten everything while I got nothing. The answer arrived the moment I walked into the reception. My mother, Corinne Hartwell, had looked through me as if I were invisible. My father, Bernard, had given me a curt nod before turning away to greet more important guests. And Penelope, resplendent in her designer gown that probably cost more than my first year's rent in the city, had simply smiled that cold, practiced smile she'd perfected since childhood. Natalie, she'd said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You actually came. How unexpected. No hug. No, I'm so glad you're here. Just that calculated acknowledgement that made it clear I was tolerated, not welcomed. The seating chart told me everything I needed to know. While aunts, uncles, and distant cousins occupied prime tables near the bridal party, I'd been placed at table 18. The last table. Tucked behind a decorative column that blocked most of the view. My table companions were Penelope's college roommate's ex-boyfriend, someone's +1 who didn't know anyone, and an elderly couple who'd gotten lost looking for a different wedding. I'd watched the ceremony from the back row of the church, squeezed between strangers while my family occupied the first 3 pews. I'd watched Penelope glide down the aisle on our father's arm, the same father who'd told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life when I refused to attend the local community college and work in his insurance office. You'll never make it out there alone, he'd said 15 years ago, his face red with anger. You think you're special, but you're not. You'll come crawling back within 6 months. I never did crawl back. I'd worked 3 jobs while putting myself through university at night. I'd lived in apartments with broken heaters and roommates who stole my food. I'd eaten ramen for dinner more nights than I could count. But I'd survived. More than survived. I'd built something extraordinary. Not that my family knew. Or cared to know. The groom, Thomas Whitmore, was someone I'd never met. Penelope had provided 0 information about him except that he was successful, came from the right kind of family, and was everything she'd ever wanted. From my obscured vantage point, I could see he was tall, well-dressed, and seemed genuinely attentive to my sister. That was more than I expected from any man Penelope would choose. The dinner service had been an exercise in humiliation. While the other tables received their meals promptly, served by attentive waitstaff who refilled wine glasses and asked about dietary preferences, table 18 was forgotten. We watched as prime rib and roasted salmon were delivered to everyone else while our table sat empty. "Excuse me," I'd finally flagged down a harried-looking server. "When will our table be served?" She'd glanced at her list, confusion crossing her face. "Table 18? That's marked as, oh." Her expression shifted to something between pity and embarrassment. There was a note that this table should receive whatever's left after primary service is complete. Whatever's left. Like we were an afterthought. Like I was an afterthought. The elderly couple had left, uncomfortable with the obvious slight. The ex-boyfriend had gotten drunk at the bar. The lost +1 had struck up a conversation with someone at another table. Which left me alone at table 18 when the server finally appeared with the paper plate of congealed leftovers. I stared at the cold food, feeling something crystallize inside me. 15 years of distance, 15 years of building a life my family knew nothing about, and this was how they chose to welcome me home. Not with reconciliation or curiosity about who I'd become, but with literal scraps. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from Diane, emergency with the Silverton account. They want to move up the presentation. Can you take a call? The Silverton account. $300 million in potential contracts. A deal I'd been cultivating for 8 months. The kind of business that would expand Hartwell Innovations into 5 new markets. I looked around the ballroom. At my mother laughing with her society friends. At my father holding court with business associates who still thought he mattered. At Penelope, dancing with her new husband, probably already planning how to spend his money. None of them had asked what I did for a living. None of them had asked where I lived or whether I was happy or successful. They'd simply slotted me into the same role I'd occupied 15 years ago, the disappointing daughter, the black sheep, the one who wasn't worth noticing. I was about to respond to Diane's text when a commotion near the head table caught my attention. Thomas Whitmore had stood up, his face pale as he stared across the ballroom. His gaze locked onto something, or someone, with an expression of absolute shock. He was looking directly at me. Before I could process what was happening, Thomas was walking across the dance floor, leaving Penelope mid-conversation with a bridesmaid. He moved with purpose, his expensive shoes clicking against the polished floor, his eyes never leaving mine. The ballroom noise seemed to fade as he approached table 18. Other guests noticed, conversations stuttering as they tracked the groom's unexpected trajectory toward the forgotten back corner. Thomas stopped 3 feet from my table, his face a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been panic. "CEO Hartwell?" His voice carried across the suddenly quiet section of the ballroom. "What are you doing here?" The paper plate of cold leftovers sat between us like evidence. And in that moment, watching my family's carefully constructed evening begin to crack, I felt the first stirring of something I hadn't allowed myself in 15 years. Not just vindication. But the quiet, powerful certainty that everything was about to change. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence that followed Thomas Whitmore's question felt like it stretched for hours, though it could only have been seconds. CEO Hartwell. The title hung in the air between us like a grenade with the pin pulled. I watched the color drain from my sister's face as she materialized beside her new husband, her perfectly manicured hand gripping his arm with enough force to leave marks. "Thomas, darling, what are you talking about?" Her voice had that strained quality she got when things weren't going according to her meticulously planned script. Thomas's eyes hadn't left mine. "Miss Hartwell. I mean, Natalie. I had no idea you were related to Penelope." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that spoke of genuine distress. "If I'd known, would have, the seating arrangements alone are." "You know each other?" Penelope's pitch rose half an octave, that telltale sign she was losing control of a situation. "Know each other?" Thomas let out a sound between a laugh and a groan. "Penelope, this is Natalie Hartwell. Founder and CEO of Hartwell Innovations. We've been negotiating a potential partnership between her company and Whitmore Technologies for the past 6 months. She's one of the most influential tech executives in the region." The words landed like bombs across the nearby tables. I could see heads turning, whispers starting to ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. My mother, who'd been holding court 3 tables away, had gone rigid, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. I stood slowly, leaving the paper plate of congealed leftovers on the table as a silent testimony. "Hello, Thomas. I didn't realize you were marrying into my family." I kept my voice level, professional. "Congratulations on your wedding." "Your family?" Thomas looked between Penelope and me as if trying to solve an impossible equation. But Penelope said, "She told me she was an only child." The words hit harder than I expected. I'd prepared myself for neglect, for dismissal, for being treated as the embarrassing relative tucked away in the corner. But erasure? Penelope had actually pretended I didn't exist. Did she now? I met my sister's eyes directly for the first time that evening. "That's interesting." Penelope's face had transitioned from pale to splotchy red, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the flush of panic and rage. "Thomas, can we discuss this privately? There's obviously been some confusion." "I don't think there's any confusion," I said quietly. "I'm exactly who Thomas says I am. And apparently, I'm the sister you decided to erase from your personal history." My mother had arrived, sweeping into the situation with the imperious authority she'd wielded over our family for decades. Corinne Hartwell, president of the Riverside Heights Garden Club, chairwoman of the Historical Society, and woman who'd spent 30 years perfecting the art of social manipulation. "Natalie," she said, my name emerging like she'd tasted something bitter. "Perhaps we should discuss this away from the guests." "Why?" I gestured to the growing audience of wedding attendees who'd stopped dancing to watch the drama unfold. "You weren't concerned about discussing my place in this family when you seated me at the leftover table. When you served me literal garbage while everyone else ate prime rib." Thomas looked down at the paper plate still sitting on table 18, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. "That's what you were served? At my wedding?" "Our wedding," Penelope hissed, but there was desperation in her voice now. The perfect day she'd planned for months was crumbling in real time. My father appeared, bourbon in hand, his face displaying the same dismissive expression I remembered from 15 years ago. "Natalie, stop making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone, opening it to my email. Because from where I'm standing, the only people who should be embarrassed are the ones who treated a guest, family or otherwise, like trash. "Thomas, I believe we had a preliminary meeting scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. to discuss the Silverton integration proposal?" Thomas nodded, still looking shell-shocked. Yes. The board has been very excited about the potential collaboration." "Silverton?" My father's bourbon glass lowered slightly. "As in Silverton Global?" "The same," I confirmed, enjoying the first crack in his dismissive facade. Hartwell Innovations has been working on a cybersecurity platform that would integrate with Whitmore Technologies' infrastructure. The combined proposal is being presented to Silverton's executive team. We're talking about a $300 million contract that would expand both our companies significantly. I watched the information process across my family's faces. My mother's social calculation engine spinning, trying to reconcile the daughter she dismissed with this new data. My father's business mind engaging, probably already computing what a company capable of landing Silverton contracts must be worth. And Penelope, my golden child sister, realizing that for the first time in our lives, I had something she didn't. Power. Success. Recognition. 300 million? My father's voice had lost its dismissive edge, replaced by the tone he used when discussing serious business matters. "You're saying you run a company involved in contracts at that level?" "I don't run a company at that level, father. I built one from scratch." I kept my voice steady, factual. Hartwell Innovations started in a shared office space 12 years ago. We now employ over 300 people across 4 offices. Last year's revenue was $47 million. This year, we're projected to hit $80 million, and that's before the Silverton deal closes. The number hung in the air. $80 million. More than my father's insurance agency had grossed in its entire 40-year existence. Why didn't you tell us? My mother's question came out strangled, her social programming struggling with this new reality. Tell you? I couldn't keep the bitter laugh from escaping. When exactly should I have mentioned it, Mother? When you returned my first Christmas card unopened? When you didn't respond to my college graduation announcement? Or perhaps during one of the many times I tried to call over the years and you let it go to voicemail? You're being dramatic, Penelope interjected, but her voice lacked conviction. We lost touch. These things happen. Lost touch, I repeated slowly. Is that what we're calling it? You know what, Penelope, you're right. Let's call it that. Let's not mention that when I started my company and tried to invite the family to our launch party, Dad told me to stop bothering him with my little hobby business. Let's not mention that when I was featured in Tech Innovator magazine 3 years ago, I sent you all copies and never heard a word back. Thomas was staring at his new wife with an expression I recognized from difficult business negotiations, the look of someone realizing they'd been operating with incomplete information. Penelope, you told me your family was small. Your parents, you, and a cousin in Maine. You never mentioned a sister who runs a tech company. Because she left, Penelope said, her voice rising with defensive anger. She walked away from the family 15 years ago. She chose to cut us off. I chose? The words came out sharper than I intended. I was 18 years old, working 3 jobs to put myself through school because Father said I wasn't worth an investment. I called home every week for the first 2 years. Every week, Mother. You answered exactly 4 times, and each conversation lasted less than 5 minutes before you had somewhere more important to be. I could feel the attention of the entire ballroom now. The band had stopped playing. Servers stood frozen with trays of dessert. This was supposed to be Penelope's perfect day, and I was dismantling it piece by piece. Part of me felt guilty. But a larger part, the part that had been served leftovers at my own sister's wedding, felt nothing but cold clarity. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Diane. Thomas Whitmore is the groom? His entire board is probably at that wedding. This could be either a disaster or an opportunity. Your call. An opportunity. I looked around the ballroom, cataloging faces. If Thomas was here, married into my family, then yes, his board members were likely among the guests. I recognized Patricia Chin, Whitmore Technologies CFO, standing near the bar. David Kowalski, their head of operations, was at table 7. Margaret Flynn, board chair, was currently staring at me with undisguised interest. These were people I'd been courting professionally for months. People who would make the final decision on whether Hartwell Innovations partnered with Whitmore Technologies. People who were now witnessing my family treat me like garbage. Thomas seemed to have arrived at the same conclusion. His face had shifted from shock to something resembling professional panic. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere private. The Grandview has several conference rooms. No. The word came out of my mouth before I fully considered it. No more private conversations. No more sweeping uncomfortable truths under expensive carpets. I came to this wedding because, despite everything, I hoped maybe enough time had passed. That maybe family meant something beyond performance and appearances. I looked directly at Penelope. You told your husband you were an only child. You erased me completely. And you know what? That tells me everything I need to know about where we stand. Natalie, please, my mother started, but I held up a hand. I'm going to leave now. I'm going to go back to my hotel room at the Riverside Grand. Yes, I'm staying in town for a few days, and I'm going to prepare for Monday's meeting with Thomas and his board. A meeting that will determine whether Hartwell Innovations moves forward with a partnership that could define both our company's futures. I picked up my clutch, leaving the paper plate of leftovers as a monument to the evening. Thomas, I'll see you Monday at 9 a.m. Please send my regards to your board members. I recognize several of them here, and I hope they've been treated better than I was. As I turned to leave, my father's voice stopped me. Natalie, wait. Let's discuss this rationally. You're clearly successful, and we're proud of what you've achieved. I turned back slowly. Proud? You're proud now? Now that there's a dollar amount attached to my name? Now that I might be useful to you? His face reddened. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant, Father. And that's fine. I understand it. But here's what you need to understand. I don't need your pride. I don't need your approval. I built something extraordinary without a single dollar or word of encouragement from any of you. And whether or not you acknowledge it doesn't change what I've accomplished. I walked through the ballroom, aware of every eye tracking my movement. The paper plate of leftovers remained on table 18, a perfect symbol of how little my family valued me. Until tonight, they hadn't known there was anything to value. And now that they did, I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they'd thrown away. The elevator doors closed behind me, sealing off the muffled chaos of the ballroom. My hands were steady as I pressed the button for the lobby, but I could feel adrenaline coursing through my system like electricity. 15 years of buried resentment had just erupted in front of 100 witnesses, including the business partners I'd been courting for half a year. Professional disaster or strategic opportunity? Diane's question echoed in my mind as the elevator descended. The Riverside Grand Hotel was 3 blocks from the Grandview, far enough that I'd made a clear statement by not staying at the wedding venue. I'd checked in 2 days ago under my company name, a habit I'd developed over years of business travel. The front desk staff had been professional and courteous, a stark contrast to the treatment I'd received from my own family. My suite overlooked the Riverside River, the city lights reflecting off the dark water like scattered stars. I kicked off the uncomfortable heels I'd worn to look presentable at my sister's wedding and poured myself a glass of wine from the minibar. My phone had been buzzing non-stop since I left the ballroom. 23 missed calls. 47 text messages. I ignored all of them and called Diane instead. Please tell me you didn't burn that bridge, she answered without preamble. I may have set it on fire, poured gasoline on it, and danced in the flames, I admitted, sinking into the suite's oversized armchair. But it was already rotted through, so I'm not sure it matters. Diane was silent for a moment. Walk me through what happened. I gave her the abbreviated version, the leftover plate, Thomas's recognition, the public revelation of my erasure from family history, and my dramatic exit. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. Well, you definitely made an impression. I've already gotten 3 LinkedIn messages from people who were apparently at that wedding. Patricia Chen from Whitmore Tech wants to schedule a coffee meeting before Monday's presentation. Margaret Flynn sent a friend request with a note saying she's very interested in hearing more about your background. I sat up straighter. Margaret Flynn reached out directly? Board chair of Whitmore Technologies, interested in your personal story? Yeah, I'd say that's significant. I could hear Diane typing. David Kowalski also sent a message. He wants to discuss additional partnership opportunities beyond the Silverton proposal. Natalie, whatever happened in that ballroom, it didn't hurt you professionally. If anything, it might have helped. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family's attempt to diminish me had inadvertently showcased my success to exactly the people who needed to see it. What about Thomas? I asked. Any word from him? 5 emails and counting. He's apologizing profusely, asking for an emergency call tonight, and promising that Monday's presentation will proceed as planned. He seems genuinely mortified about the situation. I considered this. Thomas had seemed sincere in his shock, and his horror at my treatment had appeared genuine. He really didn't know Penelope had a sister? Apparently not. Which raises interesting questions about what else your sister might have misrepresented in that relationship. Diane paused. Do you want my honest professional opinion? Always. Use this. Not maliciously, but strategically. You've just demonstrated to Whitmore's entire leadership team that you're someone who commands respect, who won't tolerate being diminished, and who has the confidence to walk away from situations that don't serve you. Those are exactly the qualities they want in a business partner. She was right, of course. Diane had been my second hire at Hartwell Innovations, brought on when the company was just me and a brilliant programmer named James working out of a cramped office above a coffee shop. She'd seen me negotiate impossible deals, navigate hostile takeovers, and build something extraordinary from nothing. If anyone understood how to leverage this situation, it was her. Set up the coffee with Patricia for tomorrow morning, I decided. And accept Margaret's friend request. Tell Thomas I'll take his call at 10 tonight, after I've had time to process everything. After hanging up with Diane, I finally looked at the messages that had been flooding my phone. Most were from family members I barely remembered, suddenly eager to reconnect now that they knew I was someone worth knowing. Cousin Rebecca, who hadn't spoken to me since I left for college, wanted to catch up over lunch. Uncle Harold, who'd told me I was wasting my life when I turned down his job offer at his car dealership, was so proud of the woman I'd become. My mother had sent 7 messages, each more desperate than the last. The final one read, "We need to talk about this situation before you do anything rash. The family's reputation is at stake." The family's reputation. Not my feelings. Not the years of neglect and dismissal. Just their precious reputation. My father's messages were more direct, businessmen to businessmen, let's discuss this like adults. There are clearly misunderstandings that need to be addressed. Call me. Penelope had sent only one message, "You've ruined everything. I hope you're happy." I stared at that message for a long time. Had I ruined her wedding? Undoubtedly. Did I feel guilty about it? I searched my feelings carefully and found only a grim satisfaction. She'd tried to erase me from existence, to pretend I'd never been born. And when that lie exploded in her face, she blamed me for the consequences. But it was the message from Thomas that made me pause. "Natalie, I am so deeply sorry. I had no idea about any of this. Penelope told me she had no siblings, that her family was small and close-knit. I never would have allowed you to be treated that way if I'd known who you were. Please, can we talk? Not about business, about family. There are things I need to understand." The thing was, I believed him. Thomas's shock had been too genuine to fake, his horror at my treatment too immediate. Which meant my sister had constructed an elaborate lie and maintained it through their entire courtship and engagement. What else had she lied about? My phone rang. An unknown number, but with a Riverside Heights area code. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Miss Hartwell? This is Patricia Chen from Whitmore Technologies." Her voice was warm, professional. "I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. My assistant mentioned you'd reached out about coffee tomorrow." "Yes, though I'm calling now for a different reason." She paused, and I could hear background noise. She was still at the wedding venue. "I wanted you to know that what happened tonight was unconscionable. I've been in business long enough to recognize family dynamics, and what I witnessed was textbook marginalization. Your grace in handling it was impressive. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Thank you, though I'm not sure I'd call my exit particularly graceful. On the contrary. You stated your boundaries clearly, acknowledged the professional implications, and removed yourself from a toxic situation with dignity. That takes remarkable self-control." Patricia's voice lowered slightly. "I also wanted to give you a heads up. Margaret Flynn is arranging an emergency board meeting for tomorrow afternoon. She wants to discuss not just the Silverton proposal, but a potential expanded partnership with Hartwell Innovations." My pulse quickened. An expanded partnership? Your company's cybersecurity platform is impressive, but what Margaret saw tonight was equally valuable: leadership under pressure. She's been concerned about cultural fit between our companies. Tonight, you demonstrated exactly the kind of principled leadership Whitmore wants to align with. After Patricia hung up, I stood at the window, watching the river flow past. In the space of 2 hours, I'd gone from the forgotten daughter eating leftovers in the corner to a CEO whose family drama had somehow enhanced her professional standing. A knock at my door startled me. I checked the peephole and found myself looking at my mother, still in her wedding attire, her carefully styled hair beginning to come undone. I considered not answering. But curiosity, that persistent character flaw, made me open the door. Natalie. My mother's voice was strained. We need to talk. Do we? I didn't move aside to let her in. Because we've had 15 years to talk, Mother. You weren't interested then. That's not fair. You left. You walked away from the family. I left for college. I tried to maintain contact. You're the ones who stopped responding. I kept my voice level, factual. But that's actually irrelevant now. What do you want? She seemed thrown by my directness. Penelope is devastated. You humiliated her at her own wedding. Penelope told her husband she was an only child. She erased me from existence. And when that lie was exposed, I'm the one who humiliated her? She was protecting herself, my mother said, and for the first time, I heard something real in her voice. Not the social calculation, but actual emotion. After you left, people asked about you constantly. Where was our other daughter? Why wasn't she at family events? It was humiliating to admit we didn't know, that you'd cut us off. I didn't cut you off. The words came out sharper than I intended. I called. I wrote. I sent invitations and announcements and updates about my life. You ignored all of it. You made a choice, Mother. Don't rewrite history now because it's convenient. She stood in the hallway, and for the first time in my memory, my mother looked uncertain. Your father wants to meet tomorrow. To discuss the situation. The situation, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? Not the 15 years we ignored our daughter or the wedding where we served her garbage. Just the situation. Natalie, please. We made mistakes, but family is family. You're right, I said quietly. Family is family. Which is why what you did hurts so much. But here's the thing, Mother, I built a life without you. A successful, meaningful life. I have people who respect me, who value me, who wouldn't dream of treating me the way you all did tonight. So I don't need you to suddenly decide I'm worth your time because I'm successful. I started to close the door, then paused. Tell Father I'll meet him tomorrow at 2. The Riverside Grand has a private dining room. Diane will send him the details. But we're meeting on my terms, at my location. Not as the disappointing daughter, but as the CEO he didn't believe I could become. After she left, I poured another glass of wine and returned to the window. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It's Thomas. I understand if you don't want to talk tonight, but I need you to know, I'm going to have a very serious conversation with my wife about honesty and family. What she did was wrong. What they all did was wrong. I'm sorry I was part of it, even unknowingly. I appreciated his message more than I expected. Thomas was in an impossible position, newly married to a woman who'd just been exposed as a liar, professionally dependent on maintaining a good relationship with me for the Silverton deal, and personally dealing with the revelation that his in-laws were not the people he thought they were. The night stretched ahead, full of possibilities I couldn't have imagined when I'd driven into Riverside Heights 3 days ago. I'd come seeking closure, perhaps hoping for reconciliation. Instead, I'd found something unexpected, the power that comes from walking away from people who don't value you, regardless of shared DNA. Tomorrow would bring the meeting with my father, coffee with Patricia Chen, and Margaret Flynn's emergency board session. The pieces were moving into position for something bigger than just a business deal. I was about to show my family exactly what they'd thrown away. And I was going to enjoy every minute of it. The Riverside Grand's breakfast terrace overlooked the morning river traffic, pleasure boats and commercial barges sharing the waterway in practiced choreography. I'd been awake since 5, reviewing financial projections and refining talking points for what promised to be the most strategically complex day of my professional life. Patricia Chen arrived precisely at 8, dressed in a charcoal suit that spoke of someone who understood power didn't require flash. She ordered black coffee and a croissant, settling into the chair across from me with the easy confidence of a woman who'd spent decades navigating corporate politics. Thank you for meeting on such short notice, she began, adding cream to her coffee with precise movements. I imagine you had a difficult night. Illuminating would be more accurate, I replied. I learned that my family's capacity for denial exceeds even my cynical expectations. Patricia smiled slightly. I've worked in tech for 30 years. I've seen every variation of family dysfunction intersecting with business interests. But last night was particularly instructive. Instructive how? She leaned back, studying me with the same analytical gaze I'd seen her use during our preliminary negotiations. Margaret Flynn has built Whitmore Technologies by identifying leaders who demonstrate integrity under pressure. She's less interested in quarterly returns than in sustainable partnerships with people she can trust. Last night, you showed her exactly that. By having a public confrontation with my family at my sister's wedding? I kept my tone neutral, though I was intensely curious about where this was leading. By refusing to accept mistreatment, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. By acknowledging professional implications while maintaining personal boundaries. And by walking away with dignity when the situation became untenable. Patricia set down her coffee cup. Margaret sees potential for something beyond the Silverton deal. She wants to discuss a comprehensive technology partnership that would integrate Hartwell Innovation's security platforms across all Whitmore operations. The scope of what she was suggesting took my breath away. That would be a 5-year commitment worth potentially $500 million. Minimum. Margaret is thinking bigger. She's considering a merger proposal that would create a new entity, combining Whitmore's infrastructure with your security innovations. You'd maintain significant autonomy, but we'd have unified market presence and shared resources. A merger. The word hung between us like a promise and a threat. Mergers meant giving up control, negotiating power structures, trusting people with the company I'd built from nothing. But they also meant resources, market expansion, and opportunities that would take decades to achieve independently. That's a significant departure from our original partnership discussion, I said carefully. Last night changed the equation, Patricia replied. Margaret saw someone she wants in her inner circle. Someone who won't compromise their principles even when family pressure is intense. That's rare, Natalie. Especially at the executive level where most of us have learned to smooth over inconvenient truths. My phone buzzed. A text from Diane. Your father just called the office. He wants to move the meeting earlier. I told him you weren't available before 2. He's not happy. I showed the message to Patricia, who read it and raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, he's used to people rearranging their schedules to accommodate him. That would be an accurate assessment of his worldview, yes. Then standing firm on your terms was exactly right. She signaled for the check. Natalie, I'm going to be direct with you. Thomas Whitmore is a decent man who got caught in a complicated family situation. But he's also young, somewhat naive, and clearly didn't do adequate due diligence before marrying into your family. Margaret has concerns about his judgment. The implication was clear. You're worried about how Penelope's deception reflects on Thomas's decision-making capabilities. We're worried about what else he might not have vetted properly. In business, a partner who misses red flags in their personal life often misses them professionally. Patricia stood, preparing to leave. Margaret will call you directly at 11. She'll present the merger framework and outline terms. I'm telling you this now so you have time to prepare, and so you understand that whatever happens with your family situation, the business opportunity is real and separate. After she left, I returned to my suite and called my senior leadership team. James Chin, my chief technology officer and the programmer who'd been with me since the coffee shop days, answered on the first ring. I hear you set your sister's wedding on fire, he said by way of greeting. Diane sent us the highlights. Did she mention the potential $500 million merger opportunity that emerged from the ashes? Silence. Then, you're serious. Patricia Chin just outlined a comprehensive partnership proposal. Margaret Flynn is calling at 11 to discuss framework. I paced the suite, my mind already racing through implications. This is bigger than Silverton, James. This could transform everything. What do they want in terms of control structure? That's what we'll find out in 2 hours. I need you to pull together our valuation data, growth projections, and the intellectual property portfolio analysis. Send everything to my secure folder before the call. Consider it done. Natalie? His voice shifted. About your family, are you okay? The question caught me off guard. James had heard stories over the years, fragments of explanation about why I never went home for holidays, why certain topics made me tense. But he'd never pushed, respecting boundaries the way good friends do. I'm processing, I said honestly. 15 years of absence gets revealed as erasure, and suddenly everyone wants to reconnect. It's exhausting. For what it's worth, you're the most principled person I know. If you walked away from them, you had damn good reasons. After we hung up, I spent the next 90 minutes preparing for Margaret Flynn's call. Financial models, market analysis, competitive positioning, all the objective data that would support whatever discussion was coming. But underneath the professional preparation ran a current of personal calculation. My family had spent 15 years pretending I didn't exist. Now they wanted back in my life because I had value they could leverage. The question was whether I had any obligation to let them. At precisely 11, my phone rang. Margaret Flynn's voice was crisp, authoritative, with the hint of a Boston accent she'd probably worked hard to soften. Ms. Hartwell, thank you for making time. I'll dispense with pleasantries and get to the point. I want to acquire Hartwell Innovations. Not merge. Acquire. The distinction was crucial. I'm listening, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Full acquisition, $800 million, paid 70% in cash and 30% in Whitmore Technology stock. You'd become Chief Innovation Officer with a seat on the board, full autonomy over the security division, and a 5-year contract with performance bonuses that could reach another $200 million if certain benchmarks are met. The numbers were staggering. More than I'd projected Hartwell Innovations would be worth even with the Silverton deal. But acquisition meant giving up the company I'd built, becoming an employee rather than an owner. That's a generous offer, I said carefully. But I'm curious about timing. Patricia mentioned a merger possibility this morning. Now you're proposing full acquisition. What changed? Margaret's laugh was dry. I see Patricia couldn't keep her mouth shut. Yes, we discussed merger frameworks. Then I spent 3 hours this morning reviewing your company's actual performance data versus what you'd previously shared. Natalie, you've been underselling yourself significantly. Your growth trajectory is extraordinary. I don't want a partnership. I want what you've built, and I'm willing to pay premium value for it. Why now? Why not 6 months ago when we first started discussions? Because 6 months ago, I didn't know who you were beyond impressive financial statements and innovative technology. Last night, I saw character. I saw someone who values principles over comfort, who maintains standards even under family pressure, who walks away from toxicity rather than compromising themselves. She paused. I've spent 40 years building Whitmore Technologies. I'm 67, Natalie. I'm thinking about succession, about who carries this company forward. I need leaders with integrity. Last night proved you have that. The weight of what she was offering pressed down on me. Financial security beyond anything I'd imagined. Professional validation from one of the industry's most respected figures. And the end of the company I'd built from nothing. I need time to consider this, I said. To discuss with my team, to review terms carefully. Of course. I'm sending the formal proposal to your attorney now. Take the week. But Natalie? I'm serious about this offer. And I'm also serious about my concerns regarding Thomas Whitmore's judgment. His marriage to your sister, the family dynamics he failed to recognize, these raise questions about his readiness for the leadership role we'd planned for him. After the call ended, I sat in silence, processing. $800 million. Chief Innovation Officer. Board seat. Everything I'd worked 15 years to build, validated and valued beyond my projections. And my family, who dismissed and erased me, would learn about it at exactly 2 o'clock when I met my father for lunch. Diane called as I was preparing for the meeting. Margaret's proposal just came through. Holy hell, Natalie. This is overwhelming, I finished. Get it to our legal team immediately. I want a full analysis by end of business tomorrow. Already done. But Natalie, there's something else. Your sister called the office. She's desperate to talk to you before you meet with your father. She says there are things you need to know about the family finances. The family finances? I felt a cold prickle of intuition. What does Penelope care about the family finances? She wouldn't say over the phone. But she sounded scared, not angry. Whatever she wants to tell you, it's important. I checked the time. 1:15. I had 45 minutes before meeting my father. Tell her she has 30 minutes. She can come to my suite at 1:30. But Diane? Have hotel security on standby. I don't trust this. The knock came at exactly 1:30. Penelope stood in the hallway, and I barely recognized her. The perfect bride from last night had been replaced by a woman with swollen eyes, smudged makeup, and yesterday's wedding dress still on, though now wrinkled and stained. You look terrible, I said, not unkindly. Can I come in? Her voice was hoarse, probably from crying. Please, Natalie. There are things you need to know before you talk to Dad. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her enter. She collapsed into the armchair I'd occupied during Margaret's call, looking smaller somehow than I remembered. Thomas left this morning, she said without preamble. Packed a bag and went to stay at his parents' house. He's talking about annulment. Because you lied about having a sister? I kept my voice neutral, though part of me felt a guilty satisfaction. Because I lied about everything. Penelope looked up at me, and for the first time in our lives, I saw something like honesty in her face. The business degree from Riverside College? I dropped out after one semester. The marketing job at Henderson Associates? I was fired 6 months ago for poor performance. The trust fund Mother always mentioned? It doesn't exist. Dad gambled most of his money away 10 years ago. We're broke, Natalie. The whole family is broke. The words hung in the air like stones. You're lying. I wish I was. She pulled out her phone, showing me screenshots of bank statements, overdue notices, and legal documents. Dad's insurance agency failed 5 years ago. He's been living on credit and loans ever since. Mother's been selling jewelry to pay basic bills. The house is in foreclosure. This wedding? Paid for by Thomas, who thought he was marrying into a successful family. I took her phone, scrolling through the evidence. The numbers didn't lie. My family wasn't just struggling, they were drowning. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Penelope's laugh was bitter. Because Dad's meeting with you today isn't about reconciliation. It's about money. He's going to ask you for a loan, or an investment, or some way to leverage your success to save himself. And I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're walking into. You could have warned me last night. Before the wedding. Before any of this. Last night, I still thought I could maintain the illusion. That Thomas would never find out about you, that the wedding would go perfectly, that I could start fresh with him without my family's failures dragging me down. She wiped her eyes. I erased you because I was ashamed. Not of you, of us. Of what we'd become. I sat down on the edge of the bed, processing this new reality. My family's dismissal hadn't been about my lack of worth. It had been about their desperate need to hide their own failure. What do you want from me, Penelope? Nothing, she said, and I believed her. I just wanted you to know the truth before Dad tried to manipulate you. You were right last night. We treated you terribly. We don't deserve your help. But I couldn't let you walk into that meeting blind. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For all of it. You deserved better than what we gave you. After she left, I sat in silence, recalibrating everything I thought I knew. The meeting at 2 wasn't going to be about family reconciliation. It was going to be a negotiation with a desperate man who saw me as a resource to be exploited. And I was going to walk in with my eyes wide open, armed with information he didn't know I had, and leverage that Margaret Flynn had just handed me. The game had changed again. And this time, I held all the cards. The private dining room at the Riverside Grand was elegantly neutral, cream walls, polished mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, positioning myself at the head of the table with my back to the windows. Power positioning, subtle but effective. My father would have to look into the light to see me clearly. Diane had sent over the final details from Margaret Flynn's acquisition proposal. $800 million. The number felt surreal even after hours of contemplation. But more surreal was knowing that the man about to walk through that door was financially desperate and saw me as a solution to problems I hadn't created. My father arrived at 2:03, 3 minutes late. A small power play of his own, probably. He wore his best suit, the navy one he reserved for important insurance pitches, though I noticed the cuffs were slightly frayed. Penelope's revelations suddenly made details like that significant. Natalie. He settled into the chair to my right rather than across from me, another tactical choice. Thank you for agreeing to meet. You said we needed to discuss the situation. I'm curious what you think needs discussing. I kept my voice professionally neutral, the tone I used with difficult clients. He ordered scotch from the server who appeared. I ordered sparkling water. The distinction wasn't lost on him. I was here for business, not bonding. Last night was unfortunate, he began once we were alone. Emotions ran high. Things were said that might have been better left private. Unfortunate, I repeated. That's an interesting way to describe learning that my sister told her husband I didn't exist. Penelope was protecting the family's privacy. You have to understand, after you left. I didn't leave, father. I went to college. There's a difference. I leaned back in my chair. But let's skip the revisionist history. What do you actually want? The directness seemed to catch him off guard. He'd probably prepared an elaborate lead-up, building to his request through careful emotional manipulation. I just eliminated that option. Fine. Direct it is. He took a long drink of his scotch. I need a business loan. $500,000 to restructure some debts and reinvest in the agency. With proper capital, I can rebuild what I've lost. What you've lost, I said softly. Penelope told me about the gambling, about the agency failing, about the foreclosure on the house. So let me clarify, you don't need capital to rebuild. You need a bailout to avoid total financial collapse. His face reddened. She had no right to tell you that. She had every right. Because you were planning to manipulate me into giving you money without full disclosure of why you needed it. I pulled out my phone, opening the screenshots Penelope had sent. These are your actual financial statements, aren't they? Not the successful family business you presented to Thomas Whitmore, but the reality. $180,000 in credit card debt. 3 mortgages on a house worth less than what you owe. The agency that hasn't generated meaningful revenue in 5 years. How did you? He stopped, realizing. Penelope. Your daughter was at least honest enough to warn me what I was walking into. I set the phone down. So let's have the conversation you actually came here for. You want $500,000 to temporarily plug holes in a sinking ship. And you think I owe it to you because we're family. I supported you for 18 years, he said, anger creeping into his voice. Raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. The least you can do is help when your family is struggling. You did the legal minimum required of a parent. That doesn't entitle you to my earnings as an adult. I kept my tone level. But I'm curious, if I'd come home 5 years ago when your business was failing, would you have asked for help? Or was I only worth contacting once you knew I was successful? He had the grace to look away. We didn't know what you'd become. Because you never asked. You never answered my calls or letters or emails. For 15 years, I tried to maintain contact with you. With Mother. With Penelope. Every attempt was ignored or rebuffed. I paused, letting the words sink in. So no, Father. I'm not giving you $500,000 to fix problems you created through gambling and poor business decisions. You'd let your family lose everything? His voice rose. Let your mother and sister end up on the street? I'd let you face the consequences of your own choices, yes. There's a difference. I pulled a folder from my bag. I prepared for this conversation. However, I'm not completely heartless. Here's what I'm willing to do. I slid the folder across the table. Inside were documents Diane had prepared based on Penelope's information. This is a proposal for a structured bankruptcy plan. You'll work with a financial advisor I'll pay for, who will help you liquidate assets responsibly, negotiate with creditors, and create a realistic path forward. I'll cover 3 months of basic living expenses for you and Mother while you execute this plan, rent on a modest apartment, food, utilities. Nothing more. He stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. You want me to declare bankruptcy? I want you to face reality. Your business failed. Your gambling created debt you can't service. Throwing my money at this won't solve the underlying problems. It'll just delay the inevitable collapse while making you dependent on me. This is humiliating, he said, voice strained. More humiliating than forging relationships with your son-in-law's business connections by pretending to be successful? More humiliating than your daughter erasing her sister from existence because she was ashamed of the family's failures? I shook my head. Father, you've been living in denial for years. This isn't humiliation. It's honesty. And what about Penelope? Thomas is talking about annulment. She'll have nothing. Penelope is an adult who made her own choices. She lied to her husband about fundamental aspects of her life and family. That's not my responsibility to fix. I softened slightly. But if she's genuinely interested in rebuilding her life honestly, I'll help her find work. Not at my company, that would be problematic, but I have contacts who might be willing to give her a chance if she's serious about changing. My father drained his scotch, signaling for another. You become hard, Natalie. Cold. I've become self-sufficient. There's a difference. I pulled out another document. There's one more thing you should know. I received an acquisition offer this morning for my company. $800 million. The number hit him like a physical blow. 800 million. Yes. Which means the daughter you dismissed as a failure, who you told would come crawling back within 6 months, is now worth more than you'll earn in 10 lifetimes. I let that sink in. And you know what's interesting? I built that value without a dollar from you. Without your support, your contacts, or your approval. Everything I am, I created despite you, not because of you. He stared at me, emotions warring across his face, shock, resentment, and something that might have been delayed realization of what he'd lost. I'm not saying this to be cruel, I continued. I'm saying it because you need to understand something fundamental. You don't get to ignore someone for 15 years and then demand they rescue you because you made poor choices. That's not how family works. That's not how any relationship works. So that's it? His voice was hoarse. You'll help with bankruptcy but nothing more? I'll help you face reality honestly, which is more than you've done for yourself in years. Take the proposal. Work with the financial advisor. Build something sustainable instead of living on credit and illusions. I stood, preparing to leave. Or don't. But either way, I'm not funding your denial anymore. Your mother won't accept this, he said, a last desperate attempt at leverage. She'll fight you on this. Mother doesn't get a vote. These are my terms, Father. Take them or leave them. I picked up my bag. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, the offer expires and you're on your own. I was at the door when he spoke again, voice barely audible. Did we really fail you that badly? I turned back. For the first time in the conversation, he looked genuinely uncertain, the bluster and manipulation stripped away to reveal the aging man beneath. Yes, I said simply. You failed me badly. You dismissed my dreams, ignored my attempts at connection, and treated me like I didn't matter. And then when I succeeded anyway, you only cared because you thought you could use me. I did support you for 18 years, he said again, but this time it sounded like a question rather than a statement. You did. And I appreciated it then. But 18 years of legal obligation doesn't entitle you to a lifetime of support, especially when you spent the next 15 years pretending I didn't exist. I softened my voice slightly. Father, I don't hate you. I don't even particularly resent you anymore. But I don't owe you my success as payment for doing the minimum required of a parent. After I left, I walked along the river for an hour, processing the conversation. Part of me had expected to feel guilty about refusing his request. Instead, I felt something closer to relief. I'd drawn a clear boundary, offered genuine help on my terms, and refused to be manipulated by guilt or obligation. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Whitmore. Can we talk? Not about business. About Penelope and what I'm learning about your family. I need perspective from someone who isn't emotionally invested in maintaining illusions. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won out. I called him directly. Thank you for calling, he answered, sounding exhausted. I'm at my parents' house, going through everything Penelope told me about her life, cross-referencing it with reality. Natalie, almost none of it was true. I know. She told me this morning. She came to you? He sounded surprised. After everything that happened last night? She warned me about my father's real intentions for our meeting today. It was probably the most honest thing she's done in years. I paused. For what it's worth, Thomas, I don't think she's malicious. I think she's desperate and ashamed and got caught in lies she didn't know how to escape. That doesn't make it acceptable, he said, but without heat. I asked her about you again this morning. Why she erased you from her history. She said it was because every time someone asked about her family, it reminded her of what you'd achieved and what she hadn't. That comparing herself to you was too painful, so she eliminated you from the narrative entirely. The explanation was somehow more painful than simple malice would have been. That's sad, I said honestly. For both of us. My board wants to meet with you tomorrow, Thomas continued. Formally, for the Silverton presentation. But Margaret has added agenda items about the acquisition proposal. I'm supposed to be in those meetings, but given everything with Penelope, Margaret's questioning whether I should recuse myself from discussions involving your family. Should you? I asked bluntly. Probably. My judgment regarding Penelope was clearly compromised. I missed obvious red flags because I wanted to believe in the version of her she presented. He sighed. I'm not saying the marriage is definitely over. But it can't continue on the foundation of lies she built. We'd have to start completely fresh, with absolute honesty, and I don't know if that's possible. After we hung up, I returned to my suite and called Diane. How did it go with your father? She asked immediately. Exactly as predicted. He wanted $500,000. I offered structured bankruptcy support instead. He's got 48 hours to decide. I collapsed onto the sofa. Diane, am I being too harsh? Should I just give them the money? Do you think giving them money would actually solve their problems? No. It would just delay the collapse and make them dependent on me. Then you have your answer. Natalie, you've built something extraordinary. You don't owe your success to people who actively dismissed you. Helping them face reality honestly is more compassionate than funding their continued denial. She was right, of course. But knowing something intellectually and feeling at peace with it emotionally were different things. That evening, I reviewed Margaret Flynn's acquisition proposal in detail. The terms were generous, more generous than I'd expected. Full autonomy over the security division. Board seat. Performance bonuses that could push the total package over $1 billion. But accepting meant giving up the company I'd built from nothing. Becoming an employee, however highly paid, rather than an owner. The question wasn't whether the offer was good. It was whether I was ready to let go of the thing that had defined me for 12 years. My phone rang. An unknown number, but I answered anyway. Miss Hartwell? This is Caroline Reynolds, Bernard Hartwell's attorney. The woman's voice was crisp, professional. Your father has asked me to contact you regarding your bankruptcy proposal. He'd like to negotiate modified terms. The terms aren't negotiable, I said flatly. He accepts the proposal as written or he doesn't. There's no middle ground. Ms. Hartwell, your father is a proud man. Then he can stay proud and bankrupt. My offer stands as is. 48 hours from this morning. After that, it expires. I hung up without waiting for a response. Power, I was learning, wasn't just about having resources. It was about being willing to walk away when people tried to manipulate you into compromising your boundaries. Tomorrow would bring the formal board meeting, Margaret Flynn's acquisition framework, and whatever family drama was still unfolding. But tonight, I'd done what I needed to do, drawn clear lines about what I would and wouldn't accept, regardless of blood relationships or social pressure. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt completely at peace with the family I'd left behind. The Whitmore Technologies boardroom occupied the entire top floor of their downtown headquarters, glass walls offering panoramic views of Riverside Heights' evolving skyline. I arrived at 8:30 for the 9 o'clock meeting, wanting time to absorb the space, to understand the territory where the next phase of my professional life would be decided. Margaret Flynn was already there, reviewing documents at the head of a table that could seat 20. She looked up as I entered, her sharp eyes assessing me with the same intensity I'd felt during our phone conversation. Punctual. I appreciate that. She gestured to the chair at her right. We have 30 minutes before the others arrive. Let's use it productively. I settled into the indicated seat, noting the power dynamic she'd established, me at her right hand, literally positioned as potential successor rather than supplicant. Your father contacted my office yesterday evening, Margaret said without preamble. Through an intermediary, asking about your role in the proposed acquisition and whether family complications might affect the deal. The audacity took my breath away. He did what? Attempted due diligence, essentially. Wanted to understand the scope of your potential windfall. Margaret's expression was unreadable. I had my assistant inform him that personnel matters were confidential and that any further contact would be considered interference in business negotiations. I'm sorry he dragged you into family dysfunction. Don't apologize. Margaret cut me off. His behavior was illuminating. It confirmed what I suspected after witnessing Saturday's events. Your family views you as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected. That takes remarkable character to overcome, Natalie. Most people internalize that treatment and let it diminish them. She pulled out a revised proposal document, significantly thicker than yesterday's version. I've spent the past day conducting deeper analysis of Hartwell innovations. Your growth trajectory, intellectual property portfolio, and client retention rates are extraordinary. But what impressed me most was your employee satisfaction data. 93% retention over 5 years. People don't stay at companies that long unless leadership creates genuine value beyond paychecks. I believe in treating people the way I wish my family had treated me, I said quietly. With respect, investment in their growth, and recognition of their contributions. That philosophy is about to be tested. Margaret opened the revised document. I'm increasing the acquisition offer to $950 million. With a modified structure. You'd retain 20% ownership of the security division as a carve-out entity, maintaining significant autonomy while benefiting from Whitmore's resources and distribution networks. The revision was brilliant. It gave me continued ownership stake in what I'd built while providing the resources for explosive growth. That's a substantial change from yesterday's proposal. Yesterday's proposal assumed you'd be satisfied with employment, however lucrative. Last night, I realized that fundamentally misunderstood who you are. Margaret leaned back. You're not someone who works for other people, Natalie. You're someone who builds things. This structure lets you keep building while removing resource constraints. The door opened and board members began arriving. Patricia Chen, carrying a tablet and coffee. David Kowalski, whose operations background had been instrumental in Whitmore's expansion. 3 other board members I recognized from preliminary meetings. And conspicuously absent, Thomas Whitmore. Thomas has recused himself from today's discussions, Margaret announced once everyone was seated. Given personal complications involving Miss Hartwell's family, he felt his judgment might be compromised. The board agreed. The meeting that followed was the most intense negotiation of my career. For 3 hours, we dissected every aspect of the proposed acquisition. Financial models were challenged and defended. Intellectual property valuations debated. Integration timelines questioned. Through it all, I held my ground on the elements that mattered: autonomy, decision-making authority, and protection for my employees. Your retention rate is impressive, David Kowalski noted during a discussion of personnel integration. But mergers often trigger attrition regardless of leadership intentions. How do you plan to maintain team stability through the transition? By being transparent from the beginning, I replied. My team knows I've been in acquisition discussions. They know any deal would include protections for their roles and compensation. And they know I won't accept terms that treat them as expendable assets. Patricia Chin smiled slightly. That loyalty goes both ways, apparently. We reached out to 3 of your senior engineers yesterday, just preliminary conversations about the potential merger. All 3 refused to discuss anything without your explicit approval. The information warmed something in my chest. My team had my back, even when presented with what were probably attractive overtures from a company like Whitmore. At 11:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Your father just showed up at the office. Security stopped him at reception. He's demanding to speak with you. What should I tell him? I excused myself from the boardroom, stepping into an empty conference room to call her. Tell security to escort him out, I said. If he returns, file a trespassing complaint. And Diane? Change all office access codes. I don't want any surprise visits from family members. Already done. But Natalie, he seems genuinely desperate. He was crying in the lobby before security removed him. The image of my father crying in my company's reception area should have moved me. Instead, I felt only a distant sadness for the man who'd gambled away his stability and now sought to manipulate his way into mine. His desperation doesn't obligate me to rescue him. The bankruptcy proposal stands. He has until tomorrow morning to accept it. When I returned to the boardroom, Margaret was outlining integration timelines. The Silverton presentation is scheduled for next week. If we close this acquisition before then, it strengthens both proposals significantly. We'd present as a unified entity with combined capabilities. That's an aggressive timeline, I noted. Most acquisitions take months to close. Most acquisitions don't have this level of strategic alignment, Margaret countered. And frankly, both our companies would benefit from momentum. The market responds positively to bold moves executed decisively. She wasn't wrong. But accepting meant making a choice in days that would define the next decade of my professional life. The meeting adjourned at noon with an agreement to reconvene Friday, 3 days away, for final negotiations. As board members filed out, Margaret asked me to stay behind. There's something you should know, she said once we were alone. Thomas came to me this morning. He's planning to file for annulment of his marriage to your sister. I'd expected this, but hearing it confirmed still carried weight. That's his decision to make. It is. But it creates complications. Your sister will likely be in a difficult position, no job, her deception exposed, a failed marriage 3 days old. Margaret studied me carefully. I'm not suggesting you're responsible for her situation. But I need to know if her potential desperation will create problems for you personally or professionally. The question was fair. Penelope made her choices. I offered to help her find work if she's serious about rebuilding honestly. Beyond that, her situation isn't my responsibility. Good. Because desperate people do desperate things, and your family has already demonstrated a willingness to interfere in your professional life. Margaret gathered her materials. Natalie, you're on the verge of something extraordinary. Don't let people who didn't believe in you when you had nothing claim pieces of what you've built now that it's valuable. After leaving Whitmore headquarters, I walked through downtown Riverside Heights, a city I'd left 15 years ago swearing never to return. The streets looked different now, new construction everywhere, the struggling industrial town of my youth transformed into something trying hard to be cosmopolitan. I found myself outside my father's insurance agency, or what had been his agency. The office was dark, a "for lease" sign in the window. Through the dusty glass, I could see empty desks and disconnected phone lines. The physical manifestation of failure my father had been hiding behind illusions and credit. My phone rang. "Penelope." "Don't hang up," she said immediately. "Please, just listen for 1 minute." I waited, silent. "Thomas is leaving me. You probably already know that. His family is furious, saying I'm a con artist who deceived their son. Mother blames me for destroying the family's last chance at stability." Her voice cracked. "And Dad is falling apart because you won't give him the money he thinks he's entitled to." "Penelope. I'm not asking you to save us. I know we don't deserve that. I'm calling because Dad is making threats. About going to the press, about telling your business partners that you abandoned your family in their time of need, about creating problems for your company." The manipulation was so predictable it was almost sad. "Let him try. I have documentation of 15 years of attempted contact that was ignored. I have proof of his gambling and financial mismanagement. If he wants to go public with this story, I'll provide full context. Let everyone see exactly who made what choices. He's desperate, Natalie. Desperate people do stupid things. Then he'll face consequences for those stupid things. But I'm not being blackmailed into funding his mistakes." I softened my voice slightly. "Penelope, you said you wanted to rebuild honestly. Does that start with helping Dad manipulate me?" Silence stretched between us. Then, quietly, "No. It doesn't. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called." "Wait." I stopped her before she could hang up. "Are you safe? Do you have somewhere to stay?" "I'm at Mother's house. Or what will be Mother's house until the foreclosure finalizes." A bitter laugh. "Living the dream. The bankruptcy proposal I gave Father includes 3 months of basic living expenses. That extends to you and Mother if he accepts it. Modest apartment, utilities, food. Nothing extravagant, but stable while you figure out next steps." "Why would you help us after everything?" "Because I'm not helping you stay comfortable in denial. I'm helping you face reality and build something sustainable." I paused. "But Penelope, if Dad tries to interfere with my business or relationships, that offer evaporates. Boundaries have consequences." After we hung up, I returned to my hotel and found Diane waiting in the lobby, laptop open, expression grim. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "Your father went to the Riverside Heights Chronicle. Gave them an interview about how his successful daughter abandoned the family in their time of need." She turned the laptop toward me. The article was already posted online. Tech CEO's family struggles while she celebrates 9-figure deal. I scanned the quotes, each one carefully crafted to paint me as heartless and ungrateful. My father describing how he'd supported me for 18 years, how I'd cut off contact, how he'd reached out multiple times for help with temporary business challenges, and been refused. No mention of the gambling, the failed agency, or the 15 years of ignored attempts at communication from my side. "This is going to blow up," Diane said. "The local angle, successful hometown girl refusing to help struggling parents, it's designed to create exactly the kind of PR nightmare that could complicate the Whitmore deal." She was right. Margaret Flynn valued integrity, but she also valued avoiding controversy. This story, left unchallenged, could poison the acquisition. "Get me the Chronicle's editor," I said, cold clarity settling over me. "And pull together every piece of documentation we have, returned letters, call logs, the police report from when I tried to visit 10 years ago and Father had me escorted off the property by security. Every single piece of evidence that contradicts his narrative. You're going to fight this publicly? I'm going to tell the truth publicly. There's a difference. I looked at the article again, at my father's quotes positioning himself as the victim. He made a choice to go public with a false narrative. Now he gets to face the consequences of that choice. My phone rang. Margaret Flynn. I assume you've seen the Chronicle article, she said. Just now. I'm preparing a comprehensive response with documentation. Don't respond publicly. Not yet. Her voice was firm but not unkind. Let me make some calls first. The Chronicle's owner sits on 2 boards with me. I want context before this escalates further. After she hung up, I sat in the hotel lobby, watching evening commuters stream past the windows. 48 hours ago, I'd been the forgotten daughter eating leftovers in the corner. Now I was the center of a media narrative, a business negotiation worth nearly $1 billion, and a family implosion that kept spiraling in new directions. Diane sat beside me, her loyalty evident in her rigid posture. Whatever you need, however you want to handle this, we're with you. The whole team. James has already texted me 3 times offering to help with PR response. I know. And I did. The family I'd chosen, my team, my true partners, had my back in ways my blood family never had. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Margaret. Just spoke with the Chronicle's owner. Your father was paid for that interview, $5,000. He positioned it as human interest, but they're starting to understand they were used. Sit tight. This may resolve itself. Paid interview. My father had literally sold a false narrative about me for $5,000. The amount was somehow worse than if it had been millions, cheap enough to show his desperation, expensive enough to show his willingness to damage me for cash. 2 hours later, the Chronicle posted an update to the article, noting that additional information has come to light regarding the family dynamics described in the original interview, and that they were conducting further investigation before publishing additional details. Margaret called again. The editor is mortified. They're pulling the article entirely and issuing a correction tomorrow. Your father's credibility is shot. They have documentation of his payment and discovered he misrepresented several facts. What happens now? Now you decide. Do you want to pursue legal action for defamation? Do you want to issue a public statement? Or do you let this die quietly while we proceed with the acquisition? I thought about my father, desperate enough to sell lies about me for $5,000. About my mother and sister, caught in the collateral damage of his choices. About the life I'd built specifically to escape this kind of dysfunction. Let it die, I said finally. On one condition, my father accepts the bankruptcy proposal by tomorrow morning, or that offer is permanently withdrawn. No negotiation, no extensions. He crossed a line today. The consequences are immediate. Fair enough. I'll have my attorney communicate those terms. Margaret paused. Natalie, you're handling this with remarkable composure. Most people would be falling apart. I spent 15 years learning not to let these people control my emotions, I replied. Today was just another reminder of why I left in the first place. That night, alone in my suite, I finally let myself feel the weight of everything that had happened since Saturday. The wedding humiliation. The CEO revelation. My father's desperation. The acquisition offer. Thomas's annulment. The media manipulation. For days had dismantled and rebuilt my understanding of family, success, and what I actually owed people who shared my DNA but had never truly known me. Tomorrow morning, my father would make his choice. And regardless of what he decided, would move forward with the life I'd built, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. The view from my window showed the river moving inexorably forward, reflecting city lights that would still shine whether I was here to see them or not. Some things continued regardless of personal drama. I intended to be one of them. The morning light filtered through the hotel suite curtains at 6:15 when my phone rang. My father's attorney, Caroline Reynolds. Ms. Hartwell, your father has accepted the bankruptcy proposal. All terms, no modifications. Her voice was professionally neutral, but I detected an undercurrent of relief. He'll meet with the financial advisor you've designated this afternoon to begin the process. Thank you for letting me know. I sat up, processing this development. Please confirm he understands that any further attempts to interfere with my business or personal life will void the agreement entirely. He understands. Ms. Hartwell, if I may speak candidly? She paused, waiting for my permission. Go ahead. Your father is a broken man this morning. The Chronicle incident, Thomas Whitmore's annulment filing, the reality of his financial situation, it all crashed down on him simultaneously. What you're offering is more compassionate than he deserves, and I told him so. After we hung up, I sat with the information. My father had capitulated. The manipulation attempts had failed. The public shaming had backfired. Now he'd face the consequences of his choices with support that maintained his basic dignity while refusing to enable further denial. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like closing a door that had been swinging open for 15 years, creating drafts that destabilized everything around it. Diane texted at 7, Whitmore board wants final negotiation session moved up to today. Margaret says they're ready to close if terms are acceptable. Are you ready for this? Was I ready to sell the company I'd built from nothing? To become part of someone else's vision, however autonomous my role? The question had been theoretical until this moment. Now it required an actual answer. I called James, my CTO, who answered groggily. This better be important. It's 7 in the morning. Margaret Flynn wants to close the acquisition today. I need to know, if I say yes, are you in? Because this only works if the core team stays intact. Silence stretched for several seconds. Then, what are the terms for the engineering division? I outlined the proposal, the 20% carve-out, the autonomy provisions, the protection for existing employees. James listened without interrupting. It's a good deal, Natalie. Better than we could build on our own in 10 years. He paused. But the question isn't whether it's a good deal. The question is whether you're ready to let go. I don't know if I am, I admitted. This company has been my identity since I was 21. Everything I achieved because Hartwell Innovations existed. That's backwards, James said gently. Hartwell Innovations exists because you achieved things. The company is what you built, not who you are. If you sell it, you don't disappear. You just get more resources to build the next thing. The wisdom of his perspective settled something in my chest. When did you get so philosophical? Around the time I watched you turn a coffee shop startup into a company worth nearly $1 billion. You learn things, observing that kind of transformation. He yawned. Call the meeting. Tell Margaret we're in. But Natalie? Negotiate hard on the autonomy clauses. Don't give up decision-making authority just because the check is big. The final negotiation session convened at 10 in Whitmore's boardroom. This time, Thomas was present, sitting quietly at the far end of the table. His presence was both awkward and necessary. He was still technically on the board, even if his personal life was imploding. Margaret opened with revised terms incorporating feedback from our previous sessions. $950 million, structured as follows: $600 million cash at closing, $300 million in Whitmore stock vesting over 5 years, 20% carve out of the security division with Natalie maintaining controlling interest, and a board seat with voting rights on all major strategic decisions. The terms were extraordinary. But I'd learned from watching my family's dysfunction that even good terms required clear boundaries. I need 3 additions, I said, pulling out the list I'd prepared with James. First, explicit veto power over any decisions affecting the security division's operations or personnel. Second, a 5-year employment contract with termination clauses that protect both parties but don't leave me vulnerable to being pushed out if philosophies diverge. Third, formal commitments that my existing team's compensation and roles are protected for a minimum of 3 years post-acquisition. Patricia Chin smiled slightly. You've been taking negotiation lessons from someone. I've been watching what happens when people make assumptions about agreements instead of documenting them explicitly, I replied, thinking of Thomas and Penelope's marriage built on lies. I want clarity, not good intentions that evaporate under pressure. We spent 3 hours refining language, testing scenarios, and ensuring that what looked good on paper would function effectively in practice. David Kowalski pushed back on some of the autonomy provisions, arguing they created potential gridlock. I held firm, explaining that autonomy wasn't about being difficult, it was about preserving the innovative culture that had made Hartwell Innovations valuable in the first place. By 1 o'clock, we had an agreement. Margaret extended her hand across the table. Welcome to Whitmore Technologies, Natalie. I think we're going to build something extraordinary together. As I shook her hand, sealing a deal that would transform my life, my phone buzzed with a text from Penelope. Dad accepted your terms. He's at the financial advisor's office now. I just wanted to say thank you. This is more than we deserved. I excused myself to the hallway to respond. It's what you needed, not what you deserved. There's a difference. Use this opportunity to build something real, Penelope. Not another illusion. Her response came quickly. I'm enrolling in community college next semester. Marketing, but doing it properly this time. Thomas's attorney says the annulment will go through, but he's offered to write me a recommendation for jobs if I complete the program honestly. It's more grace than I showed you. Growth, I thought. Actual, uncomfortable growth that came from facing consequences rather than running from them. Thomas found me in the hallway as I was preparing to return to the boardroom. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes suggesting multiple sleepless nights. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. I should have done basic due diligence before marrying into your family. If I had, none of this disaster would have happened. You fell in love with the person Penelope presented herself to be. That's not a character flaw, Thomas. It's human nature. It's poor judgment when you're in a position of responsibility. He gestured toward the boardroom. Margaret is questioning whether I'm ready for the leadership track she had planned for me. She's not wrong to question it. So prove her wrong, I said simply. Learn from this. Do better. The mistake wasn't trusting someone, the mistake was not verifying what you were told. That's fixable with discipline and process. Is that what you did with your family? Stopped trusting and started verifying? I stopped expecting them to be who I needed them to be, and started seeing them as who they actually were. It took 15 years, but I finally learned the lesson. I softened my voice. Thomas, you're 28. You have time to recover from this and build something better. Don't let one mistake define your trajectory. The contract signing happened at 3, surrounded by attorneys and board members. My signature on the final document felt surreal. 12 years of work, reduced to ink on paper that transferred ownership in exchange for numbers that seemed more conceptual than real. Margaret raised a glass of champagne once the formalities concluded. To new partnerships and shared vision. Welcome to the family, Natalie. The word family landed with unexpected weight. This was a chosen family, built on mutual respect and shared objectives rather than blood obligation. It was what family should be. People who valued your contributions and invested in your success. After the signing, I walked through downtown Riverside Heights one final time before heading back to my hotel. The city that had never felt like home suddenly looked different, full of potential rather than painful history. My phone rang. My mother. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Natalie. Her voice was strained. Your father told me about your meeting with the financial advisor. About the bankruptcy plan. And I wanted to say. She paused, struggling with words that probably felt foreign. Thank you. You didn't have to help at all. What you're offering is more than we deserve after how we treated you. You're right. It is more than you deserve. I kept my voice level. But I'm not helping because you deserve it. I'm helping because walking away completely would make me the kind of person I don't want to be. There's a difference. Will you ever forgive us? The question came out small, uncertain. I don't know, Mother. Forgiveness isn't something I can manufacture because it would be convenient. Maybe someday. But right now, I'm focused on building my life with people who actually value me. We do value you. You value what I've become despite you, not because of you. And you only started valuing it when there was a dollar amount attached. I stopped walking, looking out at the river. Mother, I don't hate you. I don't even resent you anymore. But I also don't trust you, and trust takes years to rebuild. If you're serious about changing, show me through actions over time. Not words. After we hung up, I returned to my hotel and found Diane waiting with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. We're celebrating, she announced. You just closed a deal that will transform not just your life, but everyone on the team. James is planning a company meeting for tomorrow to share the news. We toasted to new beginnings, to calculated risks, and to the family we'd built together over 12 years of shared struggle and success. What happens now? Diane asked, refilling our glasses. Now we execute the Silverton presentation next week as a unified Whitmore-Hartwell entity. We integrate operations carefully to preserve what makes both companies valuable. And I figure out what it means to be part of something bigger than what I built alone. And your family? I considered the question carefully. They face consequences and either grow from them or they don't. Either way, it's not my responsibility to manage their choices anymore. That evening, I stood on my hotel balcony watching the sun set over Riverside Heights. 4 days ago, I'd arrived in this city carrying years of unresolved pain and naive hope for reconciliation. I was leaving with something better, clarity about who I was, boundaries that protected what I'd built, and a future defined by chosen relationships rather than blood obligations. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Board is thrilled with today's outcome. Welcome aboard, partner. Let's change the industry together. Partner. Not employee. Not subordinate. Partner. I raised my champagne glass to the sunset, to my grandmother who'd taught me financial independence, to the team who'd believed in my vision, and to the woman I'd become through 15 years of building something extraordinary despite every reason to quit. The leftovers served at my sister's wedding had been intended as humiliation. Instead, they'd become the catalyst for reclaiming power I'd been giving away for too long. Sometimes the worst moments in life create space for the best transformations. You just have to be willing to walk through the fire to reach the other side. 6 months had passed since the acquisition closed, and I found myself in Margaret Flynn's office on the 42nd floor of Whitmore's headquarters, reviewing quarterly performance data that exceeded even our optimistic projections. The Silverton integration is ahead of schedule, Margaret noted, pulling up metrics on her screen. Revenue from the combined security platform has outperformed projections by 37%. Client retention is holding at 96% across both legacy portfolios. I studied the numbers with satisfaction. The merger of Hartwell's cybersecurity innovations with Whitmore's infrastructure had created something genuinely transformative, greater than the sum of its parts, as the cliché went, but in this case actually true. The team integration has been smoother than I expected, I admitted. I was worried about culture clash, but your people and mine have found common ground faster than typical merger timelines. That's because you insisted on protecting what made your company valuable instead of just accepting a check and letting us absorb everything. Margaret closed her laptop. Which brings me to why I asked you here. I'm announcing my retirement at the end of the year. I want you to take over as CEO of the combined entity. The offer landed like a physical blow. CEO of Whitmore Technologies, a company worth $3 billion after our merger, with operations across 12 countries and 4,000 employees. Margaret, I'm 33. Your board will never accept. The board suggested it, she interrupted. You've demonstrated exactly the leadership capabilities we need for the next phase. Strategic vision, operational discipline, and most importantly, the ability to make difficult decisions that serve long-term value over short-term comfort. I thought about the woman who'd sat in the back corner of a wedding reception 6 months ago, eating cold leftovers while her family pretended she didn't exist. That woman would never have imagined this conversation was possible. I need time to consider it, I said finally. This is bigger than I planned for. Take a week. But Natalie, stop underestimating yourself because your family spent years convincing you that you weren't enough. You're more than enough. You're exceptional. I left Margaret's office and drove to the modest apartment complex on the east side of Riverside Heights where my family now lived. The financial advisor I'd hired had worked methodically through my father's bankruptcy, negotiating settlements with creditors and establishing basic stability. My parents' apartment was small but clean, a two-bedroom unit that represented dramatic downsizing from the house they'd lost. My mother answered the door, looking older than I remembered but steadier somehow. The desperate social climbing had been stripped away, leaving someone more genuine underneath. Natalie. I wasn't expecting you. She stepped aside to let me in. Your father is at a job interview. Bookkeeping position at a local firm. Nothing glamorous, but honest work. The apartment was sparsely furnished but organized. No pretense, no expensive items purchased on credit to maintain appearances. Just basic functionality. How is he doing? I asked, settling onto their second-hand couch. Better. The gambling counseling is helping. He's been sober from betting for 4 months now. My mother sat across from me. Natalie, I know we don't have the right to ask for updates about your life, but I saw the announcement about the Silverton deal. $800 million in new contracts. Your name was mentioned in the press release. The team worked hard. The client trusted our vision. I kept my tone neutral, unsure why I'd come here. I wanted to check on your situation. Make sure the bankruptcy process is moving forward appropriately. It is. Your advisor has been extraordinarily patient with us. She paused. Penelope finished her first semester at community college. She got a 3.7 GPA. Real grades this time, earned honestly. The information carried more weight than it should have. My sister, finally building something genuine instead of constructing elaborate lies. That's good. Is she working? Part-time retail. She hates it, but she's showing up consistently and her manager says she's reliable. My mother's voice held cautious pride. Thomas still won't see her, but he kept his promise about the recommendation letter. She has interviews for marketing internships next month. We sat in uncomfortable silence, years of dysfunction hanging between us like smoke that wouldn't clear. I don't know how to be your daughter anymore, I said finally, surprising myself with the honesty. I don't know if I want to be. You hurt me for so long that even now, when you're trying to change, I can't feel what I'm supposed to feel. What are you supposed to feel? My mother asked quietly. Forgiveness, probably. Relief that you're getting help. Hope for reconciliation. I looked around the modest apartment. But mostly I just feel tired. Tired of carrying anger that doesn't serve me, but also unwilling to pretend the past didn't happen. No one's asking you to pretend. My mother's hands twisted in her lap. Natalie, your father and I failed you catastrophically. We let our own fears and insecurities blind us to who you actually were. When you succeeded despite us, it was easier to ignore you than face our failures as parents. That's unforgivable. Then why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to hear it. Not because I expect forgiveness or think it erases anything, but because it's true and you should know that I understand what we did. She met my eyes directly. You don't owe us a relationship. But if you're willing, we'd like the chance to build something honest, even if it's just occasional contact. No expectations, no manipulation. Just honesty about where we all are. I considered her offer. The woman in front of me wasn't the social climbing mother who dismissed my dreams 15 years ago. Bankruptcy and consequences had stripped away the pretense, leaving someone more real underneath. But realness didn't erase history. I can do occasional contact, I said carefully. Holidays maybe, if everyone understands the boundaries. But I won't pretend we're a close family. I won't introduce you to my professional world or include you in major life decisions. You lost that access through your choices. That's fair. My mother's voice was steady. More than fair, actually. As I drove away from their apartment, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release of the anger that had been taking up space I needed for other things. They were facing consequences. Growing or not growing as they chose. None of it required my emotional investment anymore. 3 months later, I stood in front of 4,000 Whitmore Technologies employees, announcing my acceptance of the CEO role. Margaret stood beside me, pride evident in her expression as she officially passed leadership to someone 40 years younger. Natalie Hartwell represents everything this company values, Margaret told the assembled crowd. Innovation, integrity, and the courage to make difficult decisions in service of long-term vision. She's built something extraordinary, and now she'll lead us in building the next chapter. The applause was genuine, my team from Hartwell Innovations leading the response. James caught my eye from the front row, giving me a subtle nod that said everything we'd survived together to reach this moment. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at my new house, a modern construction on a hillside overlooking the river, nothing ostentatious but comfortable and entirely mine. Diane, James, and Patricia Chin joined me, along with 3 other senior executives who'd become genuine friends through the merger process. To Natalie, Diane raised her glass. Who turned leftovers at a wedding into a billion-dollar company and a CEO title? That's the most elaborate revenge plot I've ever witnessed. It wasn't revenge, I protested, though I was smiling. It was just refusing to accept being diminished. Same thing, James countered. You showed them exactly what they threw away by dismissing you. That's revenge, just executed with exceptional strategic planning. My phone buzzed with a text from Penelope, saw the CEO announcement. I'm proud of you, even if I have no right to be. You deserved every bit of this success. I showed the message to the table. Patricia read it and raised an eyebrow. Are you reconciling with your family? We're establishing boundaries and occasional contact. Not reconciliation exactly, but something less toxic than complete estrangement. I set the phone down. They're facing consequences and trying to grow. I can acknowledge that without pretending the past didn't happen. That's remarkably mature, Patricia noted. Most people in your position would either completely cut them off or let them manipulate their way back into full access. You're finding middle ground. The conversation shifted to business strategy, to the opportunities and challenges of leading a company the size of Whitmore Technologies. But later, standing on my deck watching the river reflect city lights, I thought about the journey from that wedding reception to this moment. My grandmother had been right about financial independence. But she'd been teaching me something deeper, that independence wasn't just about money. It was about refusing to let other people's limitations define your potential. It was about building your own worth instead of waiting for others to recognize it. The car she'd left me, the one my in-laws had sold without permission, had been a catalyst. But the real gift had been the lesson underlying it: never let anyone take what's rightfully yours, whether that's property, dignity, or the power to determine your own path. A year after the wedding, I attended Penelope's community college graduation. She walked across the stage to receive her associate degree in marketing, her face showing genuine pride unmarred by pretense. Thomas wasn't there, they'd finalized the annulment months earlier, but several professors were, evidence that she'd built real connections through honest effort. My parents sat in the audience, my father in the suit he'd bought from a thrift store for his bookkeeping job, my mother wearing a simple dress instead of the designer labels she'd once considered essential. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by consequences but maybe more real because of it. After the ceremony, Penelope found me in the crowd. Thank you for coming. I know you didn't have to. I wanted to see you accomplish something honest, I replied. This degree represents real work, not performance. That matters. I got a job offer, she said, barely containing excitement. Junior marketing associate at a tech startup downtown. It's not glamorous, but it's in my field and they valued my interview over my history. That's exactly how it should work. I felt genuine happiness for her, this sister I'd spent so many years resenting. Congratulations, Penelope. You earned this. As I left the graduation venue, my father caught up with me in the parking lot. Natalie, wait. I wanted to say something. I turned, waiting. I read about your promotion to CEO. I wanted to tell you that I was wrong. About everything. About telling you that you'd fail, about dismissing your dreams, about only reaching out when I needed something from you. His voice cracked slightly. You became extraordinary despite me, not because of me. And I'm sorry for every year I wasted not seeing who you actually were. The apology was too late to change history. But it was honest, and honesty had value even when it couldn't repair damage already done. Thank you for saying that, I replied. I hope you continue rebuilding your life with the same honesty. 2 years after the wedding that changed everything, I stood in the same Grandview Hotel ballroom where I'd been served leftovers and publicly humiliated. But this time, I was here for the Riverside Heights Business Leadership Award ceremony, receiving recognition as Technology Executive of the Year. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the story. The same room, transformed from site of humiliation to venue of celebration. The forgotten daughter now honored by the community that had once dismissed her. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of perseverance, of building value through consistent effort, of surrounding yourself with people who see your potential rather than your limitations. I didn't mention the wedding or my family directly, but everyone in the room understood the subtext. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me, maybe 22, nervous but determined. Ms. Hartwell, I wanted to thank you. I read about your story, about being dismissed by your family and building something extraordinary anyway. I'm estranged from my parents because they don't support my career choices. Your example gave me courage to keep going. I looked at this young woman, seeing echoes of my younger self in her determination and uncertainty. The hardest thing you'll do is trust yourself when the people who are supposed to believe in you don't, I told her. But that trust, that fundamental belief in your own worth, is what makes everything else possible. Build it carefully. Protect it fiercely. And never let anyone convince you that their limitations define your potential. She thanked me and disappeared into the crowd, but the interaction stayed with me. My story had become something larger than personal vindication. It had become evidence that family rejection wasn't destiny, that success built despite opposition carried its own kind of power. That night, sitting in my home office reviewing acquisition proposals for Whitmore Technologies' next expansion phase, I received an email from Margaret Flynn, now fully retired and traveling through Southeast Asia. Congratulations on the award, she wrote. Though I'm not surprised. You've become exactly the leader I saw potential for that night at your sister's wedding. The woman who refused to accept being diminished, who walked away from toxicity with dignity intact, that woman was always going to build something extraordinary. I'm honored to have played a small role in your journey. I replied with gratitude, acknowledging the opportunities she'd provided and the mentorship that had shaped my leadership approach. But I also knew that Margaret had recognized something already present rather than creating it. The potential had always been there. It just needed space to develop away from people who couldn't see it. 5 years after eating leftovers in the back corner of a wedding reception, I had built something beyond what my 18-year-old self could have imagined. Not just financial success, though that was substantial. But genuine respect from people who valued integrity, a team that believed in shared vision, and the quiet confidence that came from refusing to let other people's judgment define my worth. My family remained at arm's length, occasional contact, civil relationships, but nothing resembling the closeness we'd never actually had. They'd built modest stability through honest effort, growing or not growing as they chose. I acknowledged their progress without feeling responsible for their journey. The leftovers served at Penelope's wedding had been intended as dismissal. Instead, they'd become the moment when I finally stopped seeking validation from people who would never provide it. The moment I chose myself over the fantasy of family acceptance. Sometimes the worst moments in life contain the seeds of transformation. You just have to be willing to plant them, nurture them, and give them room to grow into something extraordinary. I'd done exactly that. And the life I'd built, on my terms, according to my values, surrounded by people who truly saw me, was better than any reconciliation with the past could have provided. The woman who'd been served leftovers had been hungry for belonging. The woman I'd become had learned that belonging starts with accepting yourself, with or without your family's approval. And that lesson, hard-won through years of rejection and persistence, was worth more than any inheritance or family connection could ever provide. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.